Hello there, my name is Sixo, but more on that later, as it's prime time, baby, and you know what that means. Yes, we're here to check out a representation of the big dog himself. It's a new masterpiece Optimus Prime. And in this case, it's MPM-12, which is a homage to the 2018 Bumblebee movie. Now, before we begin, I should mention that today's review is brought to you by TF Source, so I'll throw a link to their site in the video description below. I'd also be very grateful if you could leave me a like for this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Also in the description is a link to my Patreon, where in exchange for your support, you can get access to a ton of perks, including exclusive galleries and early access to videos such as this. Finally, there's a link to my Redbubble store, where you can pick up a huge range of different designs, including loads of my photos across all kinds of different merch. I'm uploading new ideas all the time, so be sure to check it out and treat yourself. All that said, here is MPM-12 in his box, and it's a very straightforward and quite efficient affair, with a couple of promo pics on the front and a very brief overview of some of the toy's features on the back. Otherwise, there isn't really much to say beyond how compact the whole thing is, something that becomes much more obvious once you take out that cardboard in a tray, particularly as there aren't that many accessories to remove. In fact, there's just the one fairly decent looking gun and the actual toy itself, although I guess there is also the matrix inside the chest already, so that's something. Still, what it lacks in gimmicks it makes up for in other ways, as at least this thing makes a fine first impression when you actually get it out of the cardboard. The Bumblebee movie take on the heroic Autobot leader is one I've already fallen in love with, and honestly, I like how it's been brought to life here quite a bit. Just look at him. And I say that as someone who really was not immediately convinced on this toy from the various promotional pictures we got of it before release, with what looked to be some very strange proportions and a quite awkward aesthetic overall. Yet now that I have him in hand, I'm finding most of those fears to be immediately mitigated. That's not to say he's perfect, mind, but he's certainly winning me over a lot more than I anticipated. First, there's that head sculpt, which generally does a pretty neat job at recalling the CGI model from the film and looks suitably heroic to boot. I'm a big fan of the robotic detailing going on all over the place, although my main critique here would be the frankly redundant light piping solution on the back of the head, which fails to make the eyes glow even when you hold it up against a main light source of any kind. It leaves the eyes looking far too dull and makes me wish that they'd just painted them a nice bright blue instead. Next, you have the incredible looking chest area, with some stunning detail all over, including those signature chest windows with a beautiful translucent blue plastic and some nice robotic bits peeking out from behind it. Similar story on the abdomen section, with a crisp, nicely painted finish really bringing out the best in all that wonderful molded detail and making this design look spectacular up close. You get a lot more of that elsewhere, including on the arms and the legs of course, all of which adds up to give MPM-12 a very intricate look on the whole. Even on a rear view, you have elements such as the spinal column piece, which feels very accurate to the big screen source. In fact, given how robotic this guy looks, I was surprised to see that actually only a few pieces are made of die-cast, and even then it's reserved to bits like the inside of the legs, meaning that the rest is just nicely painted plastic. Still, it looks really good in my opinion. That said, there are some nitpicks to be had here too, with perhaps the most fatal drawback of this design being the all too obvious presence of the sides of the truck mode hanging off the underside of the forearms. It's a solution that draws a fair dose of criticism online, and I can kinda see why, as it does feel like a bit of a compromise and can be hard to forget about when you're posing the toy. Then there are a few quirks with the articulation too, although it starts off well enough with a decent range of movement allowed through most of the upper body to begin with. The first real awkward part is in the elbows, which bend forward really well but then end up moving back out of place thanks to a combo of incredibly strong ratchets and an oddly placed second hinge in the bicep area. It's not the end of the world, but it does quickly get a bit annoying during handling. I do also find elements of the hands a bit less than ideal, most notably the way the fingers are molded into a bent position, thus making them look awkward except when the hands are posed as fists. It also prevents him from doing the classic prime point. Elsewhere, there's a waist swivel but no ab crunch, and a decent if perhaps unremarkable range of motion to be found in the rest of the lower body. Still, all of the joints feel really solid all told. MPM-12 does look really decent once you get him posed up and ready for action. It's certainly not the most dynamic of robot modes I've ever fiddled with, but it gets the job done nicely all the same. That's especially true once you get that blaster in his hands, which looks very imposing, and even if this release is a little light on accessories overall, this is really the only piece needed to bring the presence of the character from the screen to life. That said, I did find that the weight of the weapon means that the wrist on my copy sags forward just a touch, but you can fix it with a quick tighten of the old screw there. When you're done with the gun, it can fold up and store away behind him, although sadly not on his back or anywhere obvious like that, as instead, it pegs in nice and tight on his bum. Stop trying to make Optimus Prime bum storage happen.
It's not going to happen.
Anyway, the other gimmick on offer here is that matrix, which is revealed by a simple opening of the chest. Although actually getting the thing out of there is easier said than done, as it's wedged in pretty tight. Once you have it though, it looks pretty good, and even has a set of die-cast metal handles, which will allow you to pop it into Prime's hands for lighting of darkest hour purposes, should you require. All told then, I'm really pleased to finally get to grips with this robot form, especially as it has alleviated a number of the concerns I had based on the promotional photographs. It doesn't entirely eliminate all of that, but I definitely think it's pretty good, all considered. It also looks suitably masterpiecey once you get it in hand, with a build quality and finish nice enough to elevate it to the level of quote-unquote premium collectible. Something that I again wasn't quite sure of before getting it in hand. In fact, I'd argue the finish is better than that found elsewhere in the MPM line overall, whilst the quality control on offer certainly feels like a real cut above where we were in the earlier days of these toys too. It also makes him a neat addition to your ranks next to other masterpiece takes on the Autobot leader, including the likes of MPM-4 and MP-44. In terms of other Bumblebee movie primes though, he's noticeably a bit shorter than both the third-party Toy World Freedom Leader and the non-transforming officially licensed 3-0 figure, although I actually think that works better for a masterpiece take anyway. And whilst the finish on offer may not match the ultra premium so good you could just hook it up to my veins stylings of 3-0's effort, I have to say that I actually think this guy feels way better in hand than Toy World's attempt. Whereas the unofficial toy looks nice, it is precisely zero fun to actually pick up and play with, on account of bits popping off, hands flopping around, or just generally the lackluster QC on offer. All stuff that the perceived positives of it just cannot compensate for. By comparison, MPM-12 is solid as anything, and ends up feeling like the vastly superior product on the whole. It means that he's definitely the transforming take that will be going on my shelf, especially with how good he looks next to stuff like Transart's Beetle, which I also recently reviewed. So, a surprisingly great start for MPM-12 then, but let's see how we get on transforming him up to truck mode. Well, that's transformation done, and you know what? I quite enjoyed that, all things considered. And as before, it's sort of impossible to go through the motions with this figure and not end up immediately comparing it to the experience of transforming Toy World's Freedom Leader, which was an exercise that ended in such palpable frustration that frankly, I'd sooner eat my own shins than do it again.
Oh God, why? Why?
I say that because although Freedom Leader's transformation has some clever ideas, the actual execution of it involves far too many instances of moving parts rubbing up against each other, to the point where some clearances are almost non-existent, not to mention that nothing clips in solidly in any way come the end result, all too easily leaving you with a bit of a hodgepodge mess on your hands. By comparison, MPM-12 is surprisingly graceful, to the point where I actually figured out how to do it all in one sitting without any instructions required. Yes, it may still have its complicated moments, but nothing leaves you shouting obscenities or wanting to rage quit the hobby as you throw the thing through the window, and ultimately isn't that how it should should be with toys. I mean, they are meant to be fun after all. Instead, everything glides and moves exactly as it should, with panels snapping together solidly and a purposeful, satisfying click-clack precision to it all that makes this a fun puzzle to achieve more than anything. To me, it's a great indication that it's not about how complicated a transformation is as to whether it's enjoyable or not, but rather how well executed and engineered the toy itself is, as it can still be intricate yet not make you want to peel your own face off. It's also yet more evidence to show that Hashtag can knock these things out better than the competition when they really want to, with this being a figure that I can already see myself going through the motions with many more times over. That said, the resulting truck mode does have its quirks, as has already been relatively well established online. Generally speaking though, I do enjoy the look of it more than I thought I was going to. For starters, there's a nifty spot of weapon storage where you can tab in the folded up robot mode rifle on the back, and even though it doesn't look the neatest, it's still a feature that I enjoy. I really like how tidy the front red section is overall, with everything looking very cohesive and some decent moulded detailing and paint applications going on as well. I'm also quite smitten with the deep blue of the windows, which looks superb when catching the light and contrasts nicely against the main block red. As for those red sections, they're a mix of paint and bare plastic, although I'm pleased to report it all looks very decent and actually is a really fantastic colour match, to the point where you'd have to go looking for it to assess which is which. It's not all so consistent though, as whilst the weathered touches on areas such as the front of the cab are neat, it's very weird how they don't continue round to the brilliant white stripes on the sides, leading to a bit of a jarring look. I'd also say that whilst the cab section looks very cohesive, the back end is where things start to visually fall apart quite a bit, with various large gaps being present and giving away more glimpses of robot mode gumph than one might like. Ultimately, it's a problem that a surprising number of Optimus Prime vehicle modes continue to bump up against, but the rear truck section looks all too obviously like a pair of folded up legs, especially with the rather massive gap in the middle, and the stonkingly conspicuous pair of feet just sitting there for all to see. I can't help but feel that it would have been preferable to at the very least have the soles be blue to try and hide them away, to say nothing of the all too evident product stamp in pride of place as well. Overall, this entire back section feels like a bit of a letdown then, and even looks bizarrely tapered out of proportion to the rest of the truck mode. Equally, I'm trying to make my mind up on those visor sections above the cab windows, especially as it's almost impossible for me to stop seeing them as some big sad droopy eyebrows somehow. What's even more strange is that they don't appear on the truck used in the actual movie, meaning that they've prioritised the look of the robot mode before he transforms. And whilst it's by no means the only inaccurate element of this toy versus the source, it's certainly one of the most obvious. I said one of, because of course I think we all know what the actual main offender is here. Yep, there's no getting around it, that's a very prominent pair of cat ears, and no mistake. And in case you were wondering if this was a mistransformation or if they could be folded away somehow, it's not, and they can't. The cat ears are a thing, and there's no way around it, leaving me with just one question. Why? Sadly, I have no answer, especially as there was seemingly no need for this to happen at all, as has been demonstrated by the incoming upgrade kit from DNA Design, which swaps out those pieces for an equivalent with a simple single hinge, thus allowing the truck to look a lot cleaner and less feline as a result. It baffles me that Hashtag left those pieces as is, as they really do disrupt the otherwise coherent look to the truck as a whole. I'm sure perhaps there's an element of cost cutting or a similarly boring real world explanation involved, but hey, at least there's a solution on the way for those that want it. But even if you don't, it's ultimately not the absolute end of the world either, and doesn't stop you enjoying the positives that this form does have to offer. And yes, it may be lacking the spectacular weathered finish of the Toy World effort, and I'd even say that there are some elements such as the back of the truck on that toy that look a little bit better too, but I know that in my opinion this is by far and away the more enjoyable option to handle, and ultimately the one that I'd rather have in my collection given the choice. It's also fun to compare it to the likes of MP-44 Convoy, which is a very different take on a masterpiece Optimus Prime, but one that does achieve an altogether cleaner look for the equivalent cab mode, truth be told. Still, I like that these two end up being roughly the same size and proportions as one another, and that MPM-12 can take MP-44's trailer for a bit of a spin should the mood take you. Overall then, this is far from a perfect toy, with some obvious quirks there for all to see, even if some of it is stuff that could be fixed by that upcoming upgrade kit. But regardless of that, there's still plenty to enjoy with the toy as is, especially as it retains the most important factor of them all. It's good fun, and that, in my book, is enough to make it a toot. Now, as I've already mentioned, you'll find a link to TF Source's site in the video description below, so do check them out for all your Transformers and third-party needs. There are also links to both my Patreon and my Redbubble store, so be sure to take a look at those if you want to support me in exchange for some awesome perks and merch. Finally, I'd love it if you could drop me a like for today's video, and don't forget to let me know your thoughts on this toy. Do you like what you see, or not so sure? Otherwise, that's it from me, so thanks for watching and have a great rest of your day. TTFN.